You are listening to The Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and we are in the middle of a series of episodes about how to engage sorrow and grief in a way that brings healing. In episode 2 of this series, I explained the 4 conditions that need to be met for you to experience healing of your sorrow and grief. And by way of review, those 4 conditions are, number 1, we need to own that our sorrows matter and that they should be taken seriously. Number 1. Number 2, we need to gradually move from a posture of contempt toward our sorrow to a posture of compassion and kindness and welcome. Number 3, we need to find a few people who can be the village for us. This will allow us to risk sharing our sorrow and grief with other people. And number 4, last, we need to move our bodies in a way that allows for the feeling and the release of our sorrow. In other words, rituals. We need rituals to work through our sorrows. Today, we are going to devote an entire episode to condition for healing number 4, moving our bodies as we participate in rituals of honoring and releasing our sorrow. By the end of today's episode, I hope you have a good understanding of what a ritual is and why rituals work, why they're effective, why they bring healing. And I hope you begin by the end of the episode to develop an imagination for how to do rituals, for what it might actually look like for you. Okay, let's start. What is a ritual? Here's my definition of a ritual. A ritual is a sequence of bodily movements and symbolic actions performed with emotion and intention for the purpose of healing and transformation. Look, I know that's a mouthful, so I'll repeat it and then I'll explain it. I'll break it down. What's a ritual? It's a sequence of bodily movements and symbolic actions performed with emotion and intention for the purpose of healing and transformation. Now let's look at this definition more closely. First, a ritual is a sequence of bodily movements. A ritual involves your body. You cannot do a ritual without moving some part of your body in a meaningful way. That's number 1. Second, a ritual involves a sequence of symbolic actions. Whatever actions you take with your body and with the objects that are used during the ritual, these actions have symbolic meaning. The actions that you take have symbolic meaning, and the objects or the elements that you incorporate into the ritual, they also have symbolic meaning. The symbolism is found in both the actions you're doing with your body and in the objects or the elements you are using. So, examples of elements you might include in a ritual: water, fire. Examples of objects that you might include in a ritual: anything from rocks to scissors to a teddy bear to a drinking glass. I mean, the opportunities for symbolic, meaningful objects is really endless. It depends on the stories that you're engaging. The point is that the elements that you incorporate and the objects you use in your ritual symbolize something real from your life. So let me give an example to make this practical. I've mentioned Francis Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, in the previous episodes, and he tells the story in that book of a very young woman who joined a convent at the age of 15. And shortly after this young woman joined the convent, her father died. When this young woman went to the head of the convent to tell her what happened, this is what the head of the convent said to this 15-year-old young woman who had just lost her father. The head of the convent said, "You may go to the funeral, but if you go, you cannot come back here. And if you choose to stay here, you cannot cry. Now, becoming a nun was very important to this 15-year-old, and so she chose to stay. And she said that each night she would lie in her bed shaking, trying to keep her tears inside. Decades later, this woman is at a ritual with a dozen or so other people, and they are all sitting in a circle. Each person shares one of their stories of heartache and grief, and there is a shrine set up on the other side of the room, a shrine to receive the grief and sorrow. Each person is taking turns walking across the room and sitting at the shrine and wailing, releasing their grief at the shrine. Now, notice, the shrine has symbolic meaning. What is it? The shrine is there to receive the sorrows and griefs of all who approach it. The shrine is there to hold, to contain, to consume all the sorrows and griefs that are presented to it. In this story, the nun walked across the room many, many times during this 3-hour-long ritual, and she lay prostrate on the floor next to the shrine, and she wailed. She was grieving the death of her father for the first time, because she was not allowed to cry, to grieve, when her father actually died. The walking across the room to the shrine has symbolic meaning. She is making a full-bodied decision to hand the grief over to God. Okay, the third attribute of a ritual is that a ritual requires that you be emotionally connected to whatever sorrow or grief your body is holding, or whatever emotion you're engaging. But you have to be emotionally connected. In other words, rituals require the involvement of your limbic brain. If you perform a series of bodily movements or symbolic actions without feeling deeply, you are not engaged in a ritual. You are merely going through some motions. All right, that's the third attribute. Fourth and last. A ritual is done with the intention of bringing healing to wounded places in your heart, your mind, your body. So I'll repeat my definition of a ritual. A ritual is a sequence of bodily movements and symbolic actions performed with emotion and intention for the purpose of healing and transformation. Now, you can perform a ritual all by yourself. However, rituals are much more powerful and more healing for the community when others are involved as witnesses to your pain. When others are involved as witnesses to your pain. Think back to the story of the nun at the shrine, grieving the death of her father for the first time. Okay, this is how Francis Weller describes what happened that day. He facilitated that ritual, and here's how he puts it. He says, no, and remember, there were multiple people there. It wasn't just this woman. No one is alone at the shrine. Every person pouring grief from their warehouse of sorrows is being attended by another. This is not a time to go it alone. Attendants are there to witness and to provide whatever support is needed. Sometimes this means holding space for their deep work. Sometimes it means placing a hand on the person so she can feel that she is not alone. For others, the attendant becomes the lap into which the grieving person can crawl to weep her most bitter tears. This display of compassion is an essential piece in our ability to truly lay down our sorrows. Okay, that's Francis Weller reflecting on this ritual. Now, let's look at what he's saying. First, he's saying that whenever someone would walk across the room to the shrine and begin to pour out their grief, that person was attended by another person. Why? Why? Because this is not a time to go it alone. We need each other. The other person is bearing witness to your grief. Sometimes the other person offers physical touch, And sometimes it's even more intense than that. Sometimes the other person is fully holding the grieving person as they weep. It is important to understand that sometimes we need to be held. We need containment so that we can feel into our sorrow and into the depth of our heartache. And this brings us to the following question. Why are rituals necessary for healing? And why are they effective? In other words, why do they work? Here's how Francis Weller puts it. Ritual offers us the two things required to fully let go of the grief we carry: containment and release. Containment offers the holding space for the ones in grief. It provides the safe place to fall, to descend into the depths of both known and unknown layers of sorrow. And Weller continues by saying, I witnessed this beautifully during funeral rituals in Africa. For 3 days, the community holds the bereaved within an elegant choreography of wailers, dancers, drummers, singers, witnesses, all focused on tending to their needs. This holding allows those deep in the throes of anguish to surrender completely to the requirements of grief. Nothing is held back. That's Francis Weller. Now, let's take a look at these very poignant words. Ritual offers us the two things required to fully let go of the grief we carry. And those two things are containment and release. Containment and release. When empathic witnesses are present, a ritual provides the containment that allows our body to release our sorrows. That's how I would put it. Without the containing, holding presence of others, our bodies cannot descend into the depths of our sorrows. And what Weller saw during funeral rituals in Africa that he witnessed is that the presence of wailers, dancers, drummers, singers, and other people, other witnesses, created a holding space so that the grieved person could surrender completely to the experience of feeling their grief and releasing their grief. So, the presence of other witnesses is one of the reasons that rituals are effective at bringing healing and transformation to our hearts, minds, and bodies. The witnesses create a container for the sorrowful person to feel their feelings all the way down. All the way down. Now, here's the second reason that rituals work, why they're effective. Rituals create a context for our bodies to express something that is deeper than words. One of the more common ways that we humans express ourselves is through language. We use words. However, some emotions are too deep for words. Words can't express the depth of the feeling. They can't get at it. In this case, when this is the case, we need a ritual. Because a ritual creates a context for our full bodies to do the expressing instead of merely our mouths. Again, let me read Francis Weller. This is how he puts it. He says, ritual is a language older than words, relying not so much on speech as on gestures, rhythms, movements, and emotion. In this sense, ritual addresses something far more primal than language. We have, in modern culture, little understanding of the ways ritual works or how it can move us into a space capable of fully releasing our long-held sorrows. That's Francis Weller. Now, what he's naming is that most modern cultures have lost a connection to the routine practice of rituals. And this is one of the reasons we have such a hard time healing in our contemporary society, because we have lost a connection to the routine, the regular practice of rituals. Here's how I want to say it. You cannot heal merely by talking with your mouth. You cannot heal merely by using your mouth. You need to get your whole body involved, and especially the deeper parts of your limbic brain that do not know words, but only know gesture, rhythm, movement. God made human beings to heal through ritual. Yes, we are creatures of ritual. Across all cultures, we are creatures of ritual. If you're a student of the Old Testament, you know that the Israelites were people who regularly practiced rituals. Why? Because rituals are the means of bodily expression that allow for the restoration of shalom, that is wholeness, in our bodies and in our communities. So many of the rituals in the Old Testament are designed to restore shalom, wholeness, inside the individual and inside the community. In fact, here's what Francis Weller says. He says, ritual is able to hold the long discarded shards of our stories and make them whole again. Ritual has the strength and elasticity to contain what we cannot hold on our own, what we cannot face in solitude. Did you catch that phrase? The long discarded shards of our stories. Ritual, according to Francis Weller, is able to hold the long discarded shards of your stories. The implication, of course, is that you have stories that you have discarded. You have parts of stories that you have dismissed, minimized, shoved into the basement of your heart. One of the reasons that ritual is effective at restoring your body to emotional health is that ritual creates a context for you to welcome back those discarded shards of stories and honor them and engage them. The presence of other witnesses, combined with the symbolic acts of the ritual, allows you to face and engage stories that you cannot face and engage alone. In this sense, rituals are like a container, like a gigantic glass jar, the size of a house, that invites the full expression of emotions that are inside of you, but have not yet been fully expressed. The emotion may be sorrow, rage, fear, or a combination. Anything and everything. Rituals can bear all of that emotional energy inside of you. Now, here's what happens when you allow yourself to feel unfelt feelings that are inside of you. When you allow yourself to do that, you will tend to feel much younger than you currently are. In other words, you may be a 50-year-old woman, but when you allow yourself to feel some of those deep feelings inside that are connected to those shards of discarded stories, suddenly you're going to feel 5 or 15 instead of 50. And the ritual container can hold that intensity. It can hold your panic, your overwhelm, your hopelessness, your aloneness, your shame, your all of it. Now, here's what will likely happen as you move toward the practice of a ritual. You will start thinking things like the following. This is self-indulgent navel-gazing. You could get stuck in these overwhelming emotions. You shouldn't need to do this. You should be over these big feelings by now. That thing from 30 years ago shouldn't be affecting you anymore. All right? It is very common for these objections to arise as you ponder engaging the discarded shards of stories via ritual. The glue that holds these objections together is simply this. It will be better for you if you don't feel these big feelings and express them via ritual. That's the sense of these objections. To say it differently, it will be better for you if you keep the stories and feelings buried. Here is what contemporary theologian Barbara Brown Taylor says about that. She puts this so well. Barbara Brown Taylor says, "I learned that sadness does not sink a person. It is the energy a person spends trying to avoid sadness that does that." That's so good. What she's saying is that we've got it backwards. We think that feeling our big feelings will sink us. But according to Barbara Brown Taylor, what is actually sinking us, what is actually keeping us stuck, is the energy we are spending trying to avoid feeling our big feelings. The energy we are spending keeping our big feelings at bay, outside of conscious awareness. Much of story work is merely about confession. And frankly, so much of ritual work is also about confession. What is confession? It is simply saying the same thing as God about something that is true, agreeing with God that this story happened and that you have very big feelings about it still inside of you. And what Barbara Brown Taylor says is, I learned that sadness does not sink a person. It's the energy a person spends trying to avoid sadness that does that. And what I would add is that it's the energy you spend trying to avoid any unfelt feeling, whether it's terror, panic, overwhelm, whatever is inside of you that is unfelt. And Barbara Brown Taylor continues by saying, when I stopped trying to block my sadness and let it move me instead, great language, let it move me, think ritual, it led me to a bridge with people on the other side. Notice that when I let the sadness move me, that's what rituals are. That's what they are. They are what happens when we let our big emotions move us to act and enact things with our physical bodies. And what Barbara Brown Taylor is saying is that when she let her sorrow move her, what she found was connection with other people. That's what the witnesses to the ritual do. They connect with you. Now, what heals the human heart ultimately is connection. Connection with others, connection with yourself, and connection with God. But connection. Rituals allow you to connect with parts of yourself that have been sent away. Rituals allow you to connect with other people as they bear witness to your heartache. And rituals allow you to connect with God, the God who made your body and made the elements of nature that you use in your ritual. So, as we end this episode, let me return to the 4 conditions that need to be met for you to experience the healing of your sorrow and grief. Number 1, we need to own that our sorrows matter and that they should be taken seriously. Number 2, we need to gradually move from a posture of contempt toward our big feelings, especially our sorrows, to a posture of compassion, kindness, welcome. Number 3, we need to find a few people who can be the village for us, because this will allow us to risk sharing our sorrow and grief with other people, because we know they've done their work and they can handle it. That's what the village is. And number 4, the focus of today, we need to move our bodies in a way that allows for the feeling and the release of our big feelings. Sorrow, grief, panic, terror, whatever it is. In other words, we need rituals. We need rituals to work through our sorrow. Now, in the next episode, part 4 of this series, I am going to invite my friend Heather Stringer to join me to talk through ritual in more depth from her experience, because Heather Stringer is someone who has taken ritual far more seriously than I have. She is someone who creates rituals and facilitates ritual for people in a healing process. So be sure to listen to the next episode, part 4 of this series. to hear from grief and ritual expert Heather Stringer.